Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. While there's probably an endless list of reasons that any pet owner could give about why they cherish their beloved animals, we're guessing that a pet's ability to assist in complex criminal investigations is not a reason that comes up all too often. Still, in some cases, this is precisely what happens, with animals of all varieties lending a much-needed hand to law enforcement. Today, we wanted to bring you 3 such cases, focusing on interesting ways in which ordinary pets have helped out in extraordinary ways. Just before we get to today's stories, a reminder that if you find our videos interesting and informative, to like and subscribe for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here are 3 crimes solved with the help of pets. In late 2020, authorities in Buncombe County, North Carolina, began investigating the disappearance of a 91-year-old woman named Nellie Sullivan. Nellie was described by those that knew her as a sweet old lady, one without any enemies, and who wouldn't hesitate to help others. As one neighbor put it, she'd give you the clothes off her back if she could. She was just very kind. This made it all the more disturbing when police began to ask around about Nellie after learning of her disappearance, only to find out that no one could remember seeing the elderly woman for years. When police asked for specifics, all neighbors could tell them was that at the time she had last been seen, Nellie had been living with her granddaughter, 46-year-old Angela Walmsley, and Angela's husband, 50-year-old Mark Barnes, at a property in the community of Candler. These same neighbors said that they had lost track of the elderly woman, though, because at one point she had fallen ill and had been hospitalized, after which Angela and Mark put her in a nursing home. Nellie had later returned to live with Angela and Mark, but no one had seen her after that. Though they had little additional concrete information to provide, neighbors expressed concern for Nellie's safety, saying that she was often left home alone while living with Angela and Mark, and that the couple would go out at all hours of the day and night. At least one neighbor said that they had brought Nellie groceries on more than one occasion before her disappearance because they were worried that she didn't have any food. In addition to all of these statements from people that knew Nellie, police uncovered one other major piece of information that piqued their suspicions. Despite the fact that no one had seen Nellie for years, her Social Security and retirement benefits were still being collected, and the prescriptions for her medications were still being filled. Naturally, investigators turned their attention to Angela and Mark. It turned out that Angela and Mark were heavy drug users who had a habit of moving around from place to place because of their circumstances. It apparently didn't take much digging for detectives to realize that they were the ones who had been collecting Nellie's retirement benefits, as well as refilling her prescriptions. Despite claiming to have no information about Nellie's whereabouts, it was clear that they wanted authorities to believe that she was alive. In December of 2020, Angela and Mark were arrested and charged with a slew of drug crimes, as well as misdemeanor animal cruelty, unlawfully reconnecting a utility, and 2 counts of abandonment of an animal. Mark was also charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. Still, though, authorities didn't have enough to fully connect them to Nellie's disappearance. As the investigation continued, this would change slightly, as the following year, both Mark and Angela would be charged with concealing a death just a month apart from each other. However, there was a major piece of the puzzle still missing. Where was Nellie Sullivan? Investigators searched everywhere they could think of, including a property that Mark and his sister had inherited in the town of Black Mountain. Nothing was found. In the meantime, Mark and Angela were uncooperative, repeatedly giving police information that went nowhere. Officers would later say in interviews that the couple was leading them on a wild goose chase. However, that wild goose chase would finally come to an end in the most unexpected of ways. On April 14th, 2022, police were called to a property in Candler with reports of a startling discovery. When investigators arrived at the residence, a trailer at 11 Beady-Eyed Lane, they spoke with the occupant, who explained the situation. According to the resident, earlier that day, they had been chasing after their pet duck when it had run underneath the trailer to avoid being caught. When they made their way under to go after the duck, they stumbled across a container, one that they believed contained human remains. Not only did this turn out to be entirely true, but when tests were conducted on the remains, they were found to be those of Nellie Sullivan. During this analysis, investigators also concluded that Nellie had been the victim of a homicide. They believed that she had been killed at a different location and brought to where she was eventually discovered. This address, 11 Beady-Eyed Lane, also happened to be a residence where Mark Barnes and Angela Walmsley had once lived. With this new evidence in hand, the couple were each charged with first-degree murder. Despite the heartbreaking conclusion to the investigation into Nellie Sullivan's disappearance, authorities were happy to finally be able to provide some semblance of closure in the case. Needless to say, they were also grateful for the help from the unlikely feathered hero in the investigation, with one officer from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office stating, quote, "If I could give that duck a medal, I would." At the time of this recording, Angela Walmsley and Mark Barnes are still awaiting trial for Nellie's murder. While we're technically bending the rules a bit here in this next story, considering this pet offered help from beyond the grave, we're going to say that it counts because it's such a fascinating case. On the afternoon of September 21st, 2015, authorities in a town in the north of Singapore called Sembawang witnessed a drug deal go down between two men. One of the men, later identified as 41-year-old Ramadas Punusami, was seen dropping a bag into the vehicle of 40-year-old Rajkumar Ayachami. Both men were followed and arrested later that night. Ramadas while he was on his way to cross the border into Malaysia, and Raj while he was still in possession of the bag from earlier. It was found to contain just under 2 kilograms, or about 4.4 pounds, of marijuana. For those unfamiliar with Singapore's drug laws, allow us to explain just how bad this was for Raj and Ramadas. The island city-state has some of the toughest drug laws on the books anywhere in the world, with at least 2 cases gaining global attention just this year, where inmates who were separately convicted of trafficking just small quantities of opiates were executed. One of these men was assessed to have borderline intellectual functioning, with an IQ of just 69. In this case, Raj and Ramadas had been caught with an amount of marijuana that well exceeded the 500 grams that made them instantly eligible for the death penalty. And in Raj's case, this is precisely what happened. After several years behind bars, he was handed a death sentence. Ramadas, who wasn't actually in possession of the drugs when he was arrested, was given a sentence of life in prison, as well as 15 strokes of the cane. However, it turned out that there was more to the case. While Raj and Ramadas had never claimed not to be in possession of drugs, they said that they hadn't intended on buying or selling marijuana. Raj said that on the day of the incident, he had instead been trying to purchase a substance known locally as butterfly, a kind of modified tobacco product sprayed with a synthetic cannabinoid that, while mimicking the effects of marijuana, is legally and chemically distinct from it. If you're familiar with recent terminology, you might know that butterfly would therefore be categorized as a, quote, designer drug. That is, a substance that is specifically created to not technically be in violation of a country's existing drug laws. This was important because if Raj had intended to purchase butterfly, he might still have been technically violating the law. However, his punishment likely would have been nowhere near as harsh as the death sentence that he was handed. He tried to argue exactly this at his trial, though the explanation fell on deaf ears. Ramadas likewise argued that he was unaware that he was transporting marijuana, though this had a similar lack of effect at his trial. Unbeknownst to the two men, though, their case would eventually take an unbelievable turn. It all started in 2017, when Raj began to share prison yard time with another inmate named Mark Tamalarasan. The two got along well enough, and the following year just happened to become cellmates. As you might imagine, Over the course of the countless hours they spent together, the men had plenty of time to talk about any number of topics. However, one day, they hit on something that would change Raj's life forever. While Raj was talking about his arrest one day, Mark mentioned that he was actually in the exact same place at close to the exact same time, except he had been there to buy marijuana, and instead had ended up with a bag of butterfly. As you might imagine, Raj was understandably floored by this revelation, and was sure that this was proof that he had been telling the truth about the drug mix-up the entire time. Mark agreed, and furthermore said that he knew that there was no way he could be mistaken. His reason? His pet hamster Patrick had died that evening, and he was so emotional over the animal's passing that he had decided to get a tattoo commemorating him. The tattoo was on his left middle finger and read RIP 21/9/15 Pat. In other words, the exact date that Raj had been busted for the marijuana. When Raj took this explanation to court, with Mark agreeing to testify about what had happened, it was initially rejected. Prosecutors argued that the two men could have easily concocted the story after getting to prison, and that it was too ridiculous to be true. However, Raj didn't give up, and managed to finally get his case in front of a 3-judge appeals court in May of 2022. Amazingly, the appeals court sided with Raj, saying of the prosecutor's argument about Raj and Mark making up the story, quote, "There was an immense difference between having the opportunity to do something and actually doing that thing." In other words, there wasn't any proof that Raj and Mark were lying about their story. Furthermore, the appeals court pointed out that Mark had no reason to lie. After all, up until now, he had managed to escape charges in connection with the case, and this could very well end up with him getting the death penalty as well. At the end of the court's decision, both Raj and Ramadas were acquitted in connection with the 2015 crime. Unfortunately, as unbelievable and interesting as this story is, because of Singapore's laws, the fates of all 3 men involved in the case remain uncertain. It's unclear if prosecutors will now try to stick Mark with the death penalty in connection with the case, or if they will try to go after Raj and Ramadas for originally trying to buy and sell the butterfly. Sadly, all we can do at this point is hope that things somehow work out for everyone involved. On March 13th, 2015, police in Newaygo County, Michigan received a frantic call about a violent incident at a home in Ensley Township. The call had been placed by a woman named Connie Ream, who said that she had discovered the lifeless bodies of her 2 neighbors, married couple, 46-year-old Marty and 48-year-old Glenna Durham. When officers arrived at the scene, they found everything just as Connie had described. The house was in disarray, particularly the living room, which had several broken items strewn across it. In the bedroom, detectives found Marty, who was quickly pronounced dead at the scene. It would later be determined that he had been shot 5 times. Nearby was his wife Glenna, who had been shot once in the head. As officers secured the crime scene, they questioned the Durham's neighbor Connie about the gruesome discovery. She explained that she lived across the street from the couple, and that she had decided to check on them after not hearing from them for 2 days. She and her husband Keith were friendly with Marty and Glenna, and it was unusual for them to go even a single day without texting or talking. Based on their first impressions of the crime scene and state that the Durham's house was in, investigators began to operate under the theory that Marty and Glenna had been the victims of a violent home invasion. With no apparent witnesses, it seemed like detectives would have their work cut out for them, until roughly an hour into the investigation, when something completely unexpected happened. Though immediately presumed to be dead, someone at the crime scene noticed that Glenna appeared to be breathing. When they reached out to touch her, her eyes momentarily flew open and her body jerked. Glenna was in fact still alive. She was immediately rushed to the hospital for treatment. Unfortunately, while police now had a potential witness to the deadly shooting at the Durham house, it would be some time before Glenna was in any condition to speak with investigators. However, little did they know that there was another possible witness to the crime, one who would initially be overlooked, but who would eventually provide some of the most startling evidence in the case. More on that in a bit, though. As if Glenna's uncanny survival wasn't enough, investigators soon found themselves with their hands full of bizarre developments in the Durham case. This began a few days after the discovery of the shooting, when Marty's 3 adult children from a previous marriage went to the home. We should point out that sources contradict each other wildly about the nature of this visit to the property, with some stating that the children just went to clean the place, while others allege that they broke in to search around while the home was still an active crime scene, and actually ended up stealing several $100s in cash that they found inside. We were unable to determine which of these statements were true, as both seemed to come from equally credible news sources, but we wanted to let you know about the discrepancy for the sake of full disclosure. In any case, the most important part of Marty's children's visit to the house is not disputed. That is, that at some point while inside, they stumbled across a mysterious manila envelope. In it were what appeared to be multiple suicide notes, which had been written to Glenna Durham's 2 adult children from a previous marriage, as well as her ex-husband. The notes appeared to have been written by Glenna, and asked her ex to look after her children, and asked her children to forgive her. Another strange development occurred when police were approached by the wife of one of Marty's cousins, who claimed that she practiced psychic readings. When the woman met with investigators, she explained that it was imperative that they look under a couch or love seat somewhere in the Durham home. This is, in fact, where police found the murder weapon, a Ruger .6. While it's not exactly clear from reports, it seems that detectives had already recovered the weapon before Marty's cousin-in-law reached out to them. Still, because this detail had not been shared with the family or the public, authorities were suspicious enough to ask the woman where she was at the time of the shooting. She provided an alibi, saying that she was with her daughter. The cousin-in-law was unable to provide any further information to investigators, merely stating that she shared their initial opinion that the Durhams had been victimized by an outside attacker. However, as months began to pass, detectives started to doubt their initial conclusions about the case. This was because the further that they dug into the Durhams' personal lives, the more that red flags began to appear. At the time of the shooting, Marty and Glenna had been married for 11 years. By all accounts, they seemed to get along well. Marty had been in a serious car wreck in 1995 prior to their relationship, which had damaged the left side of his body and left him with a brain injury. As a result, he reportedly couldn't remember his earlier marriage to his first wife, Christina Keller, or the births of their 3 children. About 5 years before he was killed, Marty's condition had gotten worse. He had gone on disability, and Glenna had also started receiving monthly payments from the government for acting as his legally recognized caregiver. It was an arrangement that appeared to work on the surface. However, as police found out through interviews with friends and family, and searches through the Durhams' financial records, the two had very opposite attitudes when it came to money. Marty was frugal, arguably to a fault. He was apparently the kind of person who was constantly switching off lights, and who would keep the heat down even in the dead of winter. There were hobbies that he loved, including hunting, but if he ever wanted anything, he was usually very cautious about the price. Glenna, on the other hand, was known to have a penchant for gambling. According to Marty's brother, on a trip a few years earlier, he had become annoyed because during their visit to see them, it felt like they couldn't go anywhere without Glenna wanting to stop off at a casino. In fact, a search of the couple's financial records showed that in 2010, she had gambled at least $75,000 away at casinos in the area. When police spoke to employees at gas stations close to where the Durhams lived, multiple clerks told them that it wasn't uncommon for Glenna to spend anywhere from $50 to $100 on lottery tickets and scratch cards 3 to 4 times a week. A detailed examination of the couple's finances painted a grim picture. Glenna was the one in charge of making their monthly payments for almost everything, but over several years, she had brought them to the brink of ruin with her gambling. They owed money to the IRS, there were outstanding medical bills, and a collections agency almost repossessed one of their cars. Most damning of all, though, was the fact that at the time of the shooting, Marty and Glenna's house was being foreclosed upon. In fact, it was supposed to happen almost exactly at the time that the crime scene at their house was discovered. Marty was allegedly clueless about all of this, while his mother had apparently contacted him the month before after seeing a legal notice in the paper about the foreclosure. Glenna had told him afterwards that it was all just a giant misunderstanding. In reality, though, she had not made payments on their mortgage in over a year. To top all of this off, in the days leading up to the shooting, Glenna, who had been on antidepressants, had stopped taking her medication. When state police were finally able to speak with Glenna in October of 2015, they asked her about these seemingly incriminating details, now believing that there was a strong possibility that she had shot Marty before attempting to take her own life. However, Glenna flatly denied any wrongdoing, even after being presented with the notes to her ex-husband and children that had been found at the scene. She said that she didn't remember writing them, and that if she had left the notes, she certainly wouldn't have included one for her ex. She claimed that she had no reason to kill Marty, stating that if she was truly unhappy, she would have been, quote, better off divorcing him and leaving him. Despite a seemingly compelling case against Glenna, for reasons known only to investigators, they felt that they didn't have strong enough evidence to obtain an arrest warrant for her. Months began to pass, and in the meantime, things began to grow uglier between Marty and Glenna's families. Tensions hit their zenith after Marty's cousin-in-law, who had gone to police claiming to be a psychic, took Glenna's side and testified on her behalf during a legal dispute between Glenna and Marty's children over their father's possessions. The cousin allegedly received threats over social media from members of Marty's family, and at one point, she found an arrow leaning against her garage door. A message written on the veins of the arrow reportedly read, "You're next." Finally, near the one-year anniversary of the shooting, the case would take its last, albeit arguably most unexpected turn, when Marty's ex-wife, Christina Keller, produced a surprise witness to the crime. It was Marty's African gray parrot, named Bud. Before we get into exactly what evidence Bud was able to bring to the table, allow me, if you will, to go on a brief tangent about African gray parrots. If you're at all familiar with these animals, then chances are you know that they are some of the most intelligent birds in the world. While their behaviors in the wild are somewhat mysterious because they are apparently notoriously difficult to study, as pets, grays are known for their impressive abilities to mimic sounds and words, even when compared to other parrots of different species. In fact, many of them have been known to sport vocabularies, if you will, of several hundred words. Honestly, it's difficult to describe how unique these little guys are, unless you've experienced it for yourself in person. I had the pleasure of interacting with a gray semi-regularly throughout my adolescent and teenage years because one of my best friends had one growing up. The way he could mimic human voices, repeat simple phrases, or even ask for things like his favorite snack of peanuts was just mind-blowing. It was also amazing to me how emotionally sensitive these birds are, and just how incredibly attached they get to people. He had relationships with people just like any other member of my friend's family. I apologize for the tangent here, but all of this will hopefully add a bit of context to what I'm about to describe next. In May of 2016, with no arrests having been made in connection with Marty's murder, his ex-wife Christina produced an alarming videotape. It was Marty's parrot, Bud, seemingly reenacting the final seconds of his owner's life. The video appeared to show Bud imitating two people in the midst of an argument, with his voice changing back and forth. Unfortunately, we can't show the video due to copyright reasons, but we'll leave a link in the description below. We can, however, describe the most compelling part of the video. It begins with one voice shouting "no" before another replies "shut up." The first voice replies with "get your expletive over here now," before the final haunting line comes, "don't effing shoot." You see, following Marty's death, Bud had gone to live with Christina. They had gotten Bud while they were married, so it only seemed natural that he should go to live with her once the tragedy had unfolded. However, early on, Bud had begun to exhibit serious signs of stress and trauma, and had started to repeat some version of the previous four-line interaction quite frequently. Christina became convinced that Bud had witnessed Glenna killing Marty, and that the words he was now repeating were evidence of the final chilling moments of a fatal argument between the married couple. Though Christina apparently filmed the disturbing video of Bud shortly after Marty's murder, she hadn't immediately done anything with it, believing that the case would be solved by other means and that this wouldn't be admissible evidence in court anyway. However, by the 1-year anniversary of the murder, she and other members of Marty's family had grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress or arrests, despite the growing body of evidence against Glenna. That's when Christina handed the tape over to a local TV reporter, hoping at the very least it would spur public interest in the case. This turned out to be an extremely effective strategy, as news of Bud's chilling revelations soon went viral online. Just weeks later, Glenna was arrested and charged with Marty's murder. For their part, police and prosecutors claimed that the decision to charge Glenna had nothing to do with all of the publicity that the video of Bud attracted. Instead, they pointed to other evidence they had uncovered, like cell phone records taken from Glenna's phone on the day before the crime scene was discovered, which indicated that she had looked up information about the same firearm that had been used as the murder weapon 5 times in less than a 1.5-hour period. Following a trial in 2017, Glenna Durham was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though video of Bud was never introduced as evidence, it's hard not to see him as having had some sort of material impact on the case. This is because, contrary to what police said, if you ask us, the timing of Glenna's arrest seems way too convenient to have been unrelated to the video. In any case, Glenna Durham currently remains incarcerated at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Pittsfield Charter Township, Michigan. That brings us to the end of today's list. To be honest, we actually came across quite a few more cases like this during our research. So if you found today's video interesting and would like to hear about more of these strange stories, be sure to let us know in the comments section below. Be sure to also let us know if you know of any stories like this that you'd like to see covered in a future video. While you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. And as always, thank you for watching.